But if you want to see the saving grace of God, we can go to Mark chapter 5 and read about the maniac of Gadara. Because this man that was so wicked, so evil, he was demon-possessed, and they had tried chaining him up, but he always came loose and was hanging out in the cemetery. And, I'm not... Rule with an iron fist or lighten the load. And if we took time to read it, we would find where he goes to the counselors that were his father's counselors, that were Solomon's counselors, and they tell him, if you serve the people, they'll serve you your entire life. But he didn't like that advice, so he went to his friends. Can I tell you, talking to the younger people for a second, the worst thing you can do is go to your friends for advice. It is the worst thing you can do. You know why? They have no life experience. They have the same life experience that you do. So if you want bad advice, go to your friends. I've heard the illustration said before that I've heard it asked that if you were to come into $100 million, would you go to a homeless person to learn how to spend that money? I hope everyone here would say no. And that's usually the reaction is, no, of course I wouldn't. But when a teenager goes to their friends for advice, they are going to a homeless person for advice. Because I have not met any teenagers in a while that have made it on their own. So he goes to his friends for advice. And I know he wasn't a teenager, but he went to people with the same life experience, the people who would probably tell him what he wanted to hear. Intentionally. And they said, you need to come down with an iron fist. You need to be harsher than your father was. And that's what he decided to do. And because he did that, the 10 tribes of Israel rebelled against him. And then we find that in chapter 14, in verse 21, we find what kind of a king he was to Judah. Because he had the 2 southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah. In verse 21 it says, and Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord did choose out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naam, an Amorites. And Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they had committed above all that their fathers had done. For they also built them high places and images and groves on every hill and under every green tree. And there were also Sodomites in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. So, Judah under Rehoboam's reign was evil, and it was a direct reflection upon Rehoboam. And he became jealous, and he began to go after all the gods of the people that God had helped them drive out of the land. It makes no sense. They went to the failed gods. We've been whenever the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord was taken and set before Dagon back in Eli's day in 1 Samuel. I never understood how Dagon, this false god, couldn't stand before the ark. And the Philistines were like, hey, let's keep our God and send them their God back. And I know there was other things that went to it, but their God literally could not stand in the presence of our God. And they decided to keep their God that couldn't stand in the presence of our God. It doesn't make sense to me, and that's exactly what Judah did under Rehoboam's reign. And then his son, we'll begin reading in chapter 15 now. We'll read the first 15 verses and then we'll come back. Now in the 17th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, reigned Abijam over Judah. And 3 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. And he walked in all the sins of his father, which he had done before him. And his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake did the Lord his God give him a lamp in Jerusalem, to set up his son after him, and to establish Jerusalem. Because David did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and turned not aside from anything that he commanded him in all the days of his life, save only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. And we haven't talked about Jeroboam, but Jeroboam is the king of Israel. Now the rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead. And in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, reigned Asa over Judah. And 41 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. And Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. And he took away the Sodomites out of the land, and removed all the idols that his father had made. And also Maacah, his mother, even her he removed from being queen, because she had made an idol in a grove. And Asa destroyed her idol, and burned it to the brook Kidron. But the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was perfect with the Lord all his days. And he brought in the let's start 15 over again. And he brought in the things which his father had dedicated, and the things which himself had dedicated, into the house of the Lord, silver and gold and vessels. So we find the next two in line in the line of succession in Judah. And we find that Abijam was a wicked king. And he only reigned for 3 years. I think that kind of tells us how good of a king he was, that God only allowed him to reign for 3 years. And it said that he walked in the same paths of his father, so he continued following after false gods. He continued going down the wrong path. And I believe it cost him his life. But I've decided to title the message tonight, "The Buck Stops Here." Because even though the odds are stacked in the favor of those who were raised in church, who were taught right from wrong, whose especially father was very involved in church and in their life, trying to lead them to God, our life is solely up to us. And what we do with our life is up to us. The excuses of, well, my parents did this, it doesn't matter. Because God can change anyone's life. If you want to, we may turn there later, but if you want to see the saving grace of God, we can go to Mark chapter 5 and read about the maniac of Gadara. Because this man that was so wicked, so evil, he was demon-possessed, and they had tried chaining him up, but he always came loose and was hanging out in the cemetery. And, I'm not superstitious. I don't have a problem necessarily walking through a cemetery at night, but you're not going to find me hanging out at a cemetery. That's weird. But this man didn't have Christ. And when Jesus got a hold of him, and he cast those demons out of him, the next time we find the maniac of Gadara, he's no longer a maniac. He's sitting clothed and in his right mind at the feet of Jesus, begging Jesus to let him follow after him, physically follow after him. Because Jesus was being chased off of the island because of how he had cast the demons out of the maniac and into the swine, and then the swine killed themselves. So all the townspeople were upset because, their money was gone. But the maniac stayed behind, and I believe continued his relationship with God there, because that's what he was instructed to do. And we find Asa in this story. He's in a line of men who haven't done right in a few generations. They've chased after the wrong things. They've followed after idols. And then Asa comes on the scene, and the Bible tells us that in verse number 11, and Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. You know, if we were talking to some Jewish people and they were being compared to David, that's a very high compliment because they esteem David very highly. And Asa had followed after God in such a way that everybody was like, hey, he's following after God like David did. And he went as far as when he came to that place, whenever he got that position of power, he tore down the groves. He got rid of the idols. He didn't tear down the high places, but he wanted the people to follow God in so much that he removed the royalty, the queenship, from his own mother. I've heard a story about this police officer who was a very good police officer, and he was asked, if you were sent to arrest your mother, what would you do? He said, call for backup. Because something like that is not easy. I couldn't imagine going to my own mother and saying, hey, you're gone. You're not following God the way you're supposed to, so you're not going to have any position of power here. But he didn't stop there. He went ahead and cut down her grove, got rid of her idol, and said, nobody is going to follow that on my watch. I believe that also goes as far as to tell us that we are responsible for those around us. See, we live in a time and age where we want everyone to like us. We want to live peaceably with everybody, and the Bible does instruct us to live peaceably. We do want to be a good neighbor, and we should be a good neighbor, and we want to not upset anybody. But that even goes the next step into not sharing the gospel with them. Whenever we find that Jesus himself was a very hated man. Remember, they hated Jesus so much they crucified him. And whenever people say, I want to be more like Jesus, hey, that's great, but you realize that there's a lot of people who's not going to like you if you are more like Jesus. Jesus spoke truth, and they hated him. So what is it that's more important in our own lives today? Is it being liked or following after God? I'm reminded of Joshua. Again, I love Joshua. I love the story of Joshua. And his last charge to the children of Israel before he died is where you get that famous quote that you've probably seen in houses. Maybe you have it in your own house. That at the end of the verse it says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And what a powerful statement that was. And I don't believe he went to Mrs. Joshua and said, hey, babe, is it okay if we follow after God? He didn't go to his children and say, hey, if you want, we can go worship the Lord today. He said, no, as for me and my house, we're going to follow God. He didn't say, we're going to follow God as long as it don't step on anybody's toes. He looked at him and said, it's up to you to choose, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I believe. If you don't believe it, it gets you absolutely nowhere. And Joshua said, you have to choose. You're going to have to choose to serve the idols, the gods of the people whose land you dwell, the ones on the other side of the flood. You have to choose what you're going to do with your life, what your family's going to do with their life. But I know what my family's going to do, and they're going to serve the Lord.